Special call meeting Thursday, August 16th, 2018. This is a budget workshop. Senator, please note we have everyone in attendance.
It's the 16th.
And staff. I'm not going to go through the staff today for this meeting. So we will begin our work session. Number one, discussion concerning the proposed fiscal year 18-19 budget. Sir?
Thank you, Mayor. We have provided some information that we set at your seat that we'll look through. We did present a budget or an agenda, so we can go through these items front to back. At the last item does include discussion and questions. So that's our catch-all. If we missed a topic that we sent out an email that we haven't addressed, we'll address that at the end. There'll probably be a number of things that we want to hit, but we put this list of items together so we could go from the comments that were made at the last meeting to this meeting. So order of note, you do have that updated consolidated statement. This is the same consolidated statement that we emailed out to you with the changes a couple weeks ago. So you should have that document in front of you. We just want to give you a hard copy for your notes and things today. Inside of that consolidated statement, there were changes that were made. One of the changes was the increase in the KLBB appropriation, $3,000 to $5,000. The second was an increase in the aviation fuel sales. We didn't appropriately indicate the fuel sales that had occurred in the current year, put those in next year. So what that did is that increased the general fund revenues for next year. We had realized the expenditures, but not the revenues. We removed a utility rate increase per the request of council for next year. That effectively moved out $296,312. That's on the revenue side of utilities. We also changed the FY20 numbers revenue-wise to mirror the FY19 numbers. Still not looking at those projections until we get into this year. And then one item that I included from our last discussion as well, I created a city council budget. What we want to look at in that council budget is training. We want to look at materials, supplies, stipend, anything that you guys want to consider, we want to put it in this budget. Typically, that's a standard practice to have a council budget. We just don't have it. So as we talked about at the retreat, anything you guys do, we just take out of the administration budget. Also a great place for it, but we have it now that we created to put in that area there. There is not a specific revenue line item for the council unless you guys want to volunteer for a car wash. You do that, we'll give you a revenue line item as well, but for now it's just an expenditure account. You can see that's $11,500. It's not a significant number, but it's a start. And so hopefully when we get down to that item, we'll be able to talk about it a little more in detail and find out what we would like to see in that item. So that's the items that were at the last meeting. I have 4 items that we wanted to discuss at this meeting that I also have written down. So we won't miss those. That's going to be utility rate, cost of service study, transportation study, the COLA and the merit, and then we have thrown in there the SRO position with the school. So I have those updates once we get to that. But just so you know, the consolidated statement in front of you, with the highlighted top, has all the items that we just discussed, changes made to here. So the first thing I want to look at to get us going, this will take a few minutes, but I do want to talk about the July financial statement. I sent this out a little while ago again, but it's just a July financial statement showing where we're at right now, revenues, expenditures, all funds, the same statement that we get every month. The beauty of this one and the fact that we're having this meeting today is, since we have July wrapped up, we have hard numbers for 5/6 of the year. There's only 2 months left in the fiscal year, and so we know our projections are pretty strong in terms of where the revenues are going to be. I went back through and looked at general fund revenues, general fund expenditures. As of right now, the over-under on the general fund, revenues over expenditures, is at $2,050,000. So that's the revenues exceeding our expenditures up and through July 31st. That's a phenomenal number. It hits everything we've talked about already. It stays in line with the projections of the growth and the impact we're having. One thing that we will have is you'll move out the appropriation to the golf course. So whatever that number ends at the end of the year, we'll move that number out. So we go from 2 million to 1.5 million. Still, at the beginning of this year's budget, we projected $3,444 of revenue surplus. I think it got a little better than that. I can't even do the math to tell you how many times better that is, but 3,444 to 1.5 million, that's incredible. And so for the next 2 months, as long as the revenues exceed the expenditures, we'll just be adding to that number on the general fund side. The projections for next year are based off of projections on the revenue side, based on projections for this year. So we're not realizing any of that revenue growth for next year at this point. It's just not how we're laying it out conservatively. We're saying this is what our base is, this is what we're doing moving forward. On the joint utility side, similar type of situation. The joint utility side shows the revenues as of July 31st at $6.2 million. And it shows the expenditures as of July 31st at $4.9 million for a surplus of 1.293 as of July 31st. Again, we look at the July period and we see that there's 365,000 revenues over surplus for that month. If we continue on a similar fashion with August and September, we could see an ending year balance, revenues over expenditures of right around $2 million. Reiterate one more time, and then I'll leave this alone. That's a phenomenal way to end the year. If you remember, at the beginning of the year, we're looking at fund balance of about $850,000. At the end of the year, if we end up with anything over $1 million, then we've doubled our fund balance, and that's part of our discussion of if our total expenditures for the year turn out to be $6 million and we're able to have $2 million in the bank, great, we're at 33%. That gets us closer to that magic 50% number, and then we determine where to allocate these dollars for long term. If we're going to look at capital projects, if we need to look at changes in rates, that's where we're going to look at it. And so we'll use those numbers when we get to another couple items down here. One of them is going to be the utility rates. The reason we move those out is because, if you recall, Councilor Sullivan pointed out, we know the only way to lower our rates is through volume and density. We've proven this year that we have that volume and density, and so we have that ability to bring in additional revenue without raising the rates for next year. So, questions on the financial report as of July 31st. I got the whole report here so I can answer any specifics. And then we can revert back if you got questions when we hit an item too. I just feel it's very important for us to thoroughly examine the current year as we're talking about next year for those projections.
So the utility budget, you say your revenues are higher, therefore you're not taking the rate increase. How much higher are they?
The revenues as of now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's 1.2 million as of July 31st. Total revenues for the utility.
Okay.
We're up for the year, 10 months into the year by 1.2 million over what we projected.
Over the actual expenditures.
Okay.
So
we have a net of 1.2 that we're adding to the bank
we've covered the
for the
projection.
first 10 months.
And once we pass the projected budget, then we forget about that one, and we're only then looking at what our actuals are. So we're over the actual expenditures.
So what that means is we had a 7-year 4% rate, which is 28% over the life. So we actually brought back that curve from 7 years to either 6 or 5 years.
More or less, definitely down to about 5.
Yeah, and consider we skipped 1 year already.
Yeah. And it proves out the point that growth is what's going to help us keep from having to continually raise the rates.
And then the thing we want to do, though, we still want to look at updating that forecast, because as we said at the last workshop, we didn't include then the new bond, but we also didn't include the new growth. So as we laid out, theoretically those would even each other out, but it's even greater than that at this point.
Right, so we had the 28%, and then we had the 8 million or the 6 million of the 8 million that came out on top of that, and we're able to cover both of those.
Yes, sir.
So, okay.
Okay, so again, I have my consolidated statement, so when we get to an item, if we want to look at current year, just say the word, got it right here, we'll get to that, and we'll go straight to it. Next item that I have, item number B, is the effective tax rate. We presented to council the ceiling for what the tax rate would be next year. It was approved by council that we wouldn't have our tax rate go higher than the 65 cent per $100 valuation. We submitted that back in to Tax and Rev, and they responded back, they accepted it. I believe they've either published it or it's in the process of being published now for their rate, so it's already published.
So the only question I would have there is, has the ad valorem tax increase holding 65 cents constant, does that put us in a rollback area?
It definitely puts us in a rollback. So where their projections are from Tax and Rev is that about 59 cent would be that area where we would effectively be out of rollback consideration.
Really? 6 cents?
That much growth.
You see that on the revenue side. It's incredible on the growth side.
How does it work with the rollback? I'm assuming that this year, actuals, if we took those into account, we probably would have been in rollback territory, but it's only on the projection that you get into?
Yeah, it's at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
And so that's when our citizens can come back and say, hey, we would like that to be, through a petition, we'd like that to be considered based on the increase in the overall revenues. The actual year doesn't really matter.
Okay.
Until they start looking at 2 years out, theoretically, because they're going to look at their hard numbers of what's come in. So back to Councilor Smith's question about, from the last meeting, the M&O rate will be, it's set at 36.15, so 3615 per $100 valuation is M&O. That'll generate $3.2 million. And then the INS rate is 2.885, and that'll generate the $2.6 million that we use to pay our debt service. So,
Yeah, those numbers look almost reversed of what I saw last time.
right. And we sent out the email from, I believe from last year. I think Councilor Sullivan had forwarded to us talking about regionally what individuals would have with their INS and their M&O rates. Those haven't been updated either, but it goes back to what Councilor Smith had said in terms of percentages that other communities are paying for their debt service versus their maintenance and operation.
What was the INS number?
INS is 2885, so 28.85 cents. And this new value, this last updated valuation puts us at about 905 million. I believe at the beginning of the year, we started at 930, 945. And so that's where the numbers moved down to this point to $905 million valuation. Remember, we were still at 730 million last year. So that growth is there and we're witnessing it. So that's where we're at with the tax rate. When we approve the budget, obviously that's one of the main items that we approve throughout that budget process. At that amount, that total 65 cent on the $905 million valuation will generate 5.879 in revenue. Questions on the tax rate?
Any reduction comes off the M&O side, right?
Yes, sir. So what happens, Tax and Rev actually sets the INS rate so that we know we're paying our debt service.
Debt service.
And then we take the other number, just simply subtract it, and we know what our debt service number is. The difference this year, as we stated before, is we're not taking anything out of impact fees to pay for any of the debt. We're straight paying it out of tax rate. And this goes back to what Councilor Smith was saying at the last meeting. We were clear cut. It's 100% coming out of the property valuation and taxes.
What was the number you said you're projecting for end of year collections for this fiscal year?
Total revenue is 7.3.
But that's not all.
That's not just tax. That's not
okay.
just property tax.
Okay. I thought I heard a 6 million figure, and I'm just wondering, was that what we're going to project the ad valorem taxes collections will be?
Right now, we projected ad valorem being 5.9.
So here's my question. Why would we project only 5.8 for next year if we're looking to collect 5.9 this year?
It's just the safety of going 2 years back and looking at those numbers. We know that the revenues are gonna be there.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's no, the benefit of using the property tax instead of sales tax is it doesn't have to be there. At the beginning of the year, it's gonna be there. The collection percentage was 99.8%, so we know we're gonna have that base, but we're still using a 2-year back model to set our budget so that we're not growing the budget exponentially greater than what we know that growth will demand. It's just a really conservative approach. In my mindset, it's tested so that the beginning of the year may look a little tougher, $3,444. The end of the year is gonna show the gravy. It's just, the mid-year adjustments allow you more opportunity than the beginning of the year.
So what happens when we get into the year and collections start exceeding, like this year, they're exceeding the budget? What happens? That money just sits in the general fund until it's allocated?
It incredibly starts, the term she uses, squirreling over into the savings account. So we keep the operating account so that we can pay, and then the others go into a savings account. And then if I think as you recall during one meeting, if something came up in the middle of the year and we wanted to consider that, and then you asked the question, we're gonna pay for it. Well, we have revenues exceeding expenditures in this amount, we can pay for it out of this line item.
Okay.
This is where we've discussed that allocation for the next park grant. $500,000 has to come from somewhere. Well, it doesn't have to come from a bond, it doesn't have to come from cupcakes. It comes from revenues over expenditures sitting in the savings account. And so at the end of this year, if we reach that 1.5 million on general fund, then we'll be able to allocate at the end of the year this money over into the park fund to sit there so that when it's time during the year and you want to do the next grant, the match is already there. And we don't have to say, God, where's that gonna come from?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it sits in the savings account,
Okay.
getting whatever interest rate we're at now.
And it also adds to our general fund so that we have more backup if something does happen.
Right, anything that doesn't go over to the savings line, to our reserves, would sit in the general fund account. Just typically, if we set it over to the reserve, then we're gonna get a little bit more interest rate, which could be 0.25 over 0.
They gotten better.
Not a lot, right, it exists now.
Yeah.
0.25 is definitely better than 0. There was a period where it almost seemed like it cost to have money in the bank, but now that's where we're at. So that's for the tax rate. I think that answers Councilor Smith's question of getting the numbers finalized. It was sent back, it has been finalized by Tax and Rev, that's the number we're gonna go with. And then if council determines to move the tax rate, you would move it. If not, this is where we're going. Questions on the tax rate?
But you said 0.59 would be the rate you'd have to drop it to prevent a potential rollback.
Plus or minus, if that's off their sheet, yeah, right around that spot.
I mean, I'm not advocating that, but I'm just saying that's something to think about.
Right.
It's just a data point right now.
And it may be something where even in the next year, we're able to discuss it even more directly to something tangible that's out there. If the revenues continue to exceed at this point and we've not made those changes. But on the flip side, it allows us the ability to say, if we're doing a specific project, a park, streets, something, that's where those dollars come from instead of, hey guys, let's go through a bond for those projects, especially if they're reoccurring expenses.
So just off the top of your head, 1 cent equals,
90,000.
So, okay, 90,000.
Yeah, because now we're at 900 million, so
okay, so, yeah.
$90,000,
All right,
So you
so
knock
if
it
we
down
go down
6,
6, that's
500,000.
540. Yeah, so
Excuse
that's a
me,
lot of
Star,
that's a
what
lot
did
of
you
CIP.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
548.
That's a park grant.
Yeah, it's a park grant, it's a ton of streets,
Mm-hmm.
it's,
Yeah.
Streets is a big deal.
Yeah.
it is huge. And so
But there's a risk.
Well, yeah,
There's a risk. I mean, if you
Huge.
get challenged, you may have to come back. That's what that says.
yeah, and that's the process. So we can send that out to you just so you know. What happens is the citizens can get together a petition with X number of votes and bring it out and say, we challenge you on this. We need you to, you'll have to reconsider it. It'll be voted upon. So not just, hey, you guys, are you sure? But it'll be voted upon. And That's where that number comes back.
And when does that, if that were to happen, when would that occur? Would that be in September?
I don't know the date, and the Star
I
knows.
think when we researched this, because every year we've been in excess of either the effective or the rollback rate. And I think when we looked at it, it would be December at the earliest. It would have to go and collect enough signatures, et cetera, to try to get a call for rollback. So it'd be at least December.
So you're saying the current fiscal year, we exceeded, when we set the rate, we exceeded the rollback rate?
Either the
Yeah, we
rollback
always
or
have.
effective. We do almost every year.
Okay.
Those sheets that we sent out in your packet, you see there was two other sheets in there, the 2017, 2016. You'll see on those sheets the same thing, that we exceeded those rates then. But the revenues weren't as vast as they are now, so that it may not be as aware to someone looking at it going, well, they're still only gonna have $3,444, so they're not just taking our money. Now the numbers are bigger, but that's where our goal is. We have to come back and start allocating those dollars to these larger projects that you all know and keep hearing that are out there.
Well, if we have those additional dollars, I don't see why the citizens would object to us
Because
putting
it's
it on
increased.
streets and,
It's an increase to their tax bill. Now, the school district will also increase, probably twice as much as ours.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be more than that dollars.
Well, it's only true if their property values are going up, because our rate would stay the same,
our rate's staying the same.
but the property values
So
are
the
going
property
up.
values are the rate increase.
Correct.
That's how we jumped from 730 up to at least 850, and then there was 50 million new.
Yeah.
Are similar cities around us experiencing that same gap between the exposure to the rollback?
Yes. We've seen that this year, especially in Travis County. We saw the values go up throughout Travis County, not just in Lago. And you see it in Leander, Georgetown, and Round Rock. We look at their numbers, it's the same. And so you're seeing that exponential growth. When we were over, when Council Sullivan and I were in Round Rock, they were talking to the same thing. The beauty is their number's that much bigger,
Yeah.
but it's the same percentage as what we're seeing.
Right.
Roughly 20% on valuations.
So
Another,
a side note, when the legislation gets in session, they're trying to cut that down to 2% or whatever and make it a mandatory
right,
thing. And no matter what we do, if the values continue to increase, we have to, we'll be forced.
I was gonna make the same point.
And that's if the legislation passes it, so.
We may want to take it if we can get it this year, because we may not have any choice the
I
subsequent
mean,
years.
does it help the average citizen? I guess, yes, as their values are going up, they're not seeing that huge spike in their taxes. But when it comes to us as a city, trying to do our CIP projects and our parks and stuff like that, that'll all go away.
Right.
If that legislation goes through.
Right.
Yeah, that's
We'll be on
that,
dirt roads and
Yeah.
we'll have a stick and a little wheel and the kids will be going down the road.
Just one thing that I've watched over the years is that you've almost got to keep up with your rates as you go along, because if there's a downturn in the economy, you're stuck with this for a year. Free market can move whenever.
right.
We can only move once a year.
Once a year.
So it's a windage kind of thing as to where you're gonna go. And if the market does in fact turn down on you, you can't, once you drop it, then it's hard to come back.
Come back, yeah.
So you kind of want to figure out what your glide slope is, on your revenue side through your tax rates. Otherwise, you could actually, as you start to feather it down, I saw that happened to us, I think in 2009 and 2010. The market crashed on us, and then all of a sudden, we couldn't get anything through. And I think we laid off code enforcement and we cut back everything. Nobody got raises. I mean, it went to bare bones during that time because you had to wait. And the problem was because we were in a recession, there was no growth to bring the number back up. So we were kind of stuck for like 4 or 5 years, in kind of this drought, if you will, economic drought on the money. So I've kind of learned that you almost have to kind of feather this stuff in, even if you have to do it slightly in advance, because you don't know when you're gonna get knocked down on the next business cycle.
Well, and to be fair, if we look after the first fiscal quarter and see that we do have a significant surplus, I'm pretty sure that nobody in the city would mind if we took on some extra street projects, or we took on, some very visible things. Obviously, Boggy Ford, we're not gonna have $6 million, right, to repay Boggy.
Never can tell.
Well, you never can tell,
See,
but.
keep building at this rate.
I think that we need to make sure that if we do project surpluses, that we're putting a portion of it back into the community immediately so that they see that that is spent wisely, right? Whether it's being very vocal about paying back debt services, or putting something that they can physically see as a change. I know, a lot of our debt comes from wastewater, which is incredibly important, and I'm so glad that the city did that, because it's so important to have that for the longevity, but it's not very visible. It's not something our town sees very much.
You can-
Well, I
Thinks about.
I think we talked about, maybe in our retreat, and I can't think of what it's called, so maybe y'all can help me. But under each, not necessarily each fund, but under some funds or under departments, pigeonholing monies,
Yeah.
so that like, golf course or something, if they're bringing in revenues, instead of, see, how do I explain it? Anyway, you've got cash on hand, so if you need something,
So
and it's
you
set,
want an
it's,
enterprise fund is what you're saying.
Well, no, there
what
was
we talked
something-
about, Mayor, and the
it was
same thing
something
as the
else.
Budget message is, when the year comes up and we do the regular year-end budget allocations, so we make sure we've covered everything and we do the transfers, we take any of that surplus, we put some into the capital projects fund just for the CIP. We put some into the parks fund just for the park. So we're earmarking those dollars specifically for those projects instead of just putting it into the general fund reserve or the utility fund.
yeah, it was kind of like you said, water pays for water, so if funds were coming in, the money that was generated by water is earmarked to be spent on water projects and stuff, so.
Well, that was the concept.
Yeah, and that's where we're at now, is as those dollars come in at the end of the year, we're gonna come back and say, look at what the surplus was. We wanna move these over to these spots, so that when we get to this CIP, and you're looking at these items and you go, well, how are we gonna pay for this item? There's how we're gonna pay it, because there's only a couple items in the CIP when we get to that area that are actually funded. So if they're not funded, they either move to the next year, or you find a way to fund them. That's what we're faced with.
Do we move money between years, or do we move it off onto the balance sheet and get it off the profit and loss statement altogether and start again with a new zero budget?
Yeah,
So
year to year, you're zeroing out.
You're zeroing out your P&L or your income statement. You're zeroing that out, so that money has to go somewhere. I know it's cash and it probably stays in cash, but how do you account for the liability of it? Do you count it on the balance sheet?
It all comes back and it is figured into that fund balance.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all going to a reserve. General fund, revenues exceeding expenditures, you zero it out, you go into reserve, move on to the next year. Okay, that's the tax rate. Next item, we kind of touched this one a little bit, utility rate discussion. I just brought this up again. At the last meeting, we said, hey, we'd like to take those numbers out and see it. I told you that that number represents
$96,312.
thank you, $1,000. The numbers still work for next year if we take it out and we don't include an increase. The only difference is we're just not continuing with the rate study. But if we take that $15,000 to $30,000 and we approve a rate study for next year, then we've still handled our due diligence responsibility on operating an enterprise fund.
Did you not include the rate survey in this? Was this not a part of the budget?
I don't think we've actually got an earmark of 30 into the rate study.
Okay.
I don't think that's a number in here. We'll just have to check to clarify, but I think we left that out based on pulling revenues out and then presenting back to council.
Do we have an assumption page with all this, of what we assumed when we created all this?
Said after this workshop, we will create a new page before this month, so you've got it going into your final month of 3 public hearing meetings.
Well, I don't know about the other members, but I want that rate study.
Yeah,
I want to see where we're at. I want to make sure that we don't get ourselves into a situation where we're not charging enough to take care of what we've got to take care of.
You talking
Yeah,
about-
and you get slapped with 28% increase.
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't
that's-
want to have to do that. I've done that once before. That's an ugly thing to do.
Yeah, and I'm personally, yes, we absolutely need the rate study without question. And I think we probably have enough from surplus budget from this year to pay for that, if I'm following correctly. And I would support not changing the rate on water if we're going to continue at the evaluation rate of 65 cents, right, of 0.65. Because although that won't create a tremendous amount of surplus this year or this coming year, we have some from this year. So that's kind of where I would stand because if we do a rate increase on the water and we know our citizens have a large valuation increases coming, right, based on the numbers that they're giving us, I think that's a double whammy that's not going to go over well. And we have a lot more flexibility by maintaining the tax valuation rate.
Well, we haven't gone a year, we have not gone a year in what, 3-4 years now, where we didn't see an increase in utilities? Because it was either the water rates or sewer.
Right,
Well, and the base charge or the, volumetric.
Right.
One or the other went up.
For
And sometimes
at least
both.
4 years, I'm
Right.
gonna say.
if we can swing it, I'd love to hold off on any rate changes on the water until we get that study done.
Well, and I would make the point that if we get the rate study and it says we're okay, reducing the water rates would be another thing that's very visible to the residents
Absolutely.
that they would love, because that's probably the second highest thing I hear bitching about.
Well-
Streets is one and water rates are too high as two.
And it would increase population here because it's not just this community where you hear that across all communities in Central Texas about high water rates and the discussion around it. So that's an area that would draw more businesses and more citizens to our community. if we had
Just
better.
remember, we're a small town with a low density. That's what makes us different. We're not like Cedar Park where it's kind of compact and it's flat and level.
Well, that's the biggest complaint out of the Dripping Springs population is the water rates and the increases that they continue to have there. And so I know and they're a similar small town with a low density, right? And and Waverly, here from Waverly, other towns that maybe are slightly larger than us, but similar demographics.
Well, and Ron, if you noticed, what I said was, we do the study, and if it says
And
we're
then-
okay, then that would be a very visible thing to do, in my mind.
Yeah, but my look at this is, right now, we don't know.
Yeah,
Right,
we
right.
need to make a
Right
decision.
now, there's
from
been
place of
such a
knowledge.
change in our demographic and our population, number of homes, that kind of thing. Anything that we did 2-3 years ago, I'm not sure has any application to us right now. And we need something that tells us
We've had a
this is
paradigm
where we
shift.
are right now.
Yeah, we need.
And then we can discuss all that other stuff, but first thing we need to do is find out where we are.
If we're good with that item, we won't add it back in to the budget projections. We'll leave it the way it is, and we'll move on. Okay. Next item, short-term debt. Short-term debt was an item that we earmarked in the budget book, talking about equipment and vehicle loans, roughly in the amount of $800,000, $400,000 plus or minus general fund, $400,000 plus or minus in the utility fund, and we were recommending paying those off at the end of the year so we don't have those debt payments moving forward. We talked about the last workshop, we didn't really get to a head, but it's a big deal. We need to figure out what council wants to do. Again, those dollars would, at the end of the year, would come out from the revenues exceeding expenditures in both funds, and we wouldn't be going into reserves, we would be paying those out of existing operating budget.
If we were to pay those off, do you have an estimate of what the fund balance would be in both the utility and the general?
Yeah, so if we're looking at 1.5 at the end of the year in general, and we pay off the 400, let's just go with those numbers now, that's still 1.1 on top of the 3.5 that was already in general fund,
So you're talking about having 4.6 million,
4.6 on the low side.
okay?
And then over here, if we're at roughly 1.5 on the low side of joint utility, and we were at 850,000, so that's 2.3, 2.4, take out the 4, we're at 2 million.
Okay.
So we still,
Would you need a vote on that or just direction from
well,
council?
if we take the direction, what we'll do is we'll bring that back to council at a meeting as an agenda item. That way, it's not an appropriated item at this point. We'll bring it to you before the year end. We'll finalize the hard number from the banks, bring it to you, and then you can effectively make your final decision at that point. We just want to get the go-ahead that you're good to bring it to an action item to at least vote on it.
But one question, I know, for example, in the police department, they try to spread their police cars out, over multiple years, so they're not do 2 cars and 2 cars and 2 cars. And so if you just draw a line today and you pay it up to that line, then we got another 2 cars coming at us the following year, and maybe 2 more the following year on just normal obsolescence. So is there gonna be any money set aside to start feeding those accounts in this budget?
Yes, sir. So looking at the numbers right now, we've left in the payments for next year, roughly $242,000 for utility and general fund for next year. If we pay this off, those dollars we could remove out of the budget from both departments, from both funds. But for equipment for next year, we went ahead and allocated the full cost of each piece of equipment to pay it off. So we buy a $45,000 Charger for the police department. We pay $45,000 and we don't carry any debt on it next year and the years moving forward. There will only be a few items that we continue lease options on. 2 categories are golf course in terms of
Cards.
carts and some of the equipment. Everything else would be purchase items. So yes, sir, it would be a change in how we handle these items moving forward.
And it would put the amount of the interest and the payments back into the budget.
That's right. Yes.
I'm very supportive of that, of change. I would much rather us get into a process where we pay for the items that we need rather than incurring debt.
They're just saying bank it before you spend it.
Yes. And the thing is, we'll have enough money added back to the budget by taking away those payments and that interest to be able to afford a number of vehicles, like a couple of $100,000 a year. You can buy a lot of cars for that.
Sure can.
And this goes back to part of that capital budget where we would allocate money towards the capital budget moving forward so that when we're making capital purchases, just like vehicles, we expend it out of that fund, out of that category. Instead of just saying, yes, the chief is still going to have a police car, but it would pay for it out of the capital budget, not his operating budget. Even though we have fixed assets in each line item, we would still have the dollars over here. Grand scheme of things, let's hypothetically say that the generator goes out at Lago Fest before the main, it's a theory, I think, before the main group comes on.
Never happen.
It won't happen, but just in case, we'd have that fund set aside to buy that generator faster. The library this year, real life, had a generator issue for the main utility or internet system, something that supported that system. I bet it took us, wherever Eric's at, it took us 4 months to figure out how to get that process to be able to buy it. We put it in here as a capital asset, we can do it, and we set the money aside during the budget planning time. We buy it when it's time, and we don't have to move the funds around. It's still approved by council, allocated by council. It just allows us through the CIP and through that fund to make it happen.
We can depreciate capital assets. We can't depreciate
You
operational
can't depreciate
expenses.
it, we don't depreciate it.
Assets,
Right.
yeah, it depends on which assets we're at.
But a
some can be
vehicle, we
depreciated.
would.
Some are going to be depreciated. some
Yeah, the
aren't.
vehicles, whether we pay for them upfront or the debt finance them, we're still going to depreciate them over time.
Yeah, they'll turn out to be, police cars lose value in about 3 years.
Right.
So that's why-
Utility vehicles maybe last a little bit longer, but, so I think, Josh, you and I had this conversation, and I'm not saying I'm going against, what Suzanne's saying, but I've got this concept from Ron, and that is, do you want to pay everything off right now? And that means our current taxpayers are completely paying for an asset that future taxpayers will be getting the advantage of. And that's literally what's going to happen. If we pay for the trucks all this year, for example, then people who move in next year and the year after and the year after, they got those assets for free. They don't pay for them. Okay.
But ideally, the idea there then is that we'll have enough revenues to get additional assets and additional services to the community.
The only thing I think we're saving is the interest, and you're talking interest on the 800,000 that we're paying off. That doesn't add up to
What was
hundreds
it,
of
John?
thousands of dollars.
24,000 plus or minus.
24,000 a year
Yeah,
that we're paying to the bank for what?
agreed.
I mean, that's 24,000 we can put back into the budget and use for the citizens.
Sure.
That right now we're paying to a bank that's giving us absolutely nothing to benefit.
Well, they're giving you money over time, so that is a benefit.
Yeah, but-
And the only point I would make is twofold. Number one, you're talking about the fact that the future taxpayers get scot-free. And number two, what happens when we're not so fat and flush with funds? Okay, you will have taken a bunch of cash to pay off things. You won't have that cash around because you used it to pay off these capital assets that are typically financed.
You were talking about 800K with a remaining balance of 6.6 million roughly is what we're estimating. It's a small portion of our available liquid assets. And I think that would be valuable to me, right? And it would give some freedom so that we don't have to go through the entire contract pricing and researching interest rates and who's going to give Danny the best deal for a new cruiser, right? I mean, obviously we're going to do that, but I like to clear the decks as much whenever we can, and it does seem like a small percentage to me.
And when it comes to the citizens and the future, I mean, how many people are paying in 2019 for debt that was taken on in 1984?
Fair, right?
And
I didn't live here in
and
1984.
in 2050, or in some of these notes that we have out here, how much of that stuff is going to go away, and there's still going to be people paying for it?
And there'll
So-
be new items that'll be purchased each year that people are going to be paying for every year.
Absolutely.
So
I think
to me,
it's probably
to me, this seems small in comparison to what our long-term debt is putting on future
Yeah.
generations.
completely agree. When you have water and wastewater assets that are 30-year lived, and you want to, I think you want to have debt associated with that mirrors that, and that way that all the taxpayers that eventually get the benefit do end up paying for that.
Right.
I think it's a concept that works more for the longer lived, higher cost things, maybe less so for the cars. I just wanted to discuss it because I think it has some merit.
And we have, over the last, budget, we made sure that whatever the life of that was, is what it was tied to. And on the notes.
Clean that up last
You know,
year.
as long as we stay with that, then it'll eventually work itself out, so nothing is ever being passed on, hopefully.
Yeah.
But,
What we'll do, Mayor, we'll go ahead and present, we'll get the numbers hardened, we'll put them on the September agenda, and then you guys can look at that at the September 6th agenda. That way, if you wanted to remove the items, if you vote to do that, and then you want to remove the numbers from next year's budget, you can do that in your final approval on the 20th, and you can look at it again on the 13th if you want to consider it, because we have the 6th, the 13th, and the 20th scheduled for meetings in September.
Yeah, but I think that anytime you get rid of your short-term debt, you get rid of your short-term debt.
Yeah.
We have the longer debt, we have the long-term debt, so if we can free up some money, might as well
It's
free
like
up the
carrying
money.
a credit card balance.
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Philosophically, why would you want to give money away? Because that's what you're doing when you're paying interest on these short-term.
I understand, but how many people go out and pay for a truck with their credit card? Not many. I mean,
Not
these,
many people who live here, but there are plenty of people in the world that do.
but my point is that a truck is a capital asset and many times has a 7 to 10 year life. So it's not something that you, like a printer that maybe has a 2 to 3 year useful life, for example.
put it on my American Express so I can get the reward points and then pay it off the next month.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I will be quiet. I'm not fighting this move. I just wanted to raise this point so we could discuss it. That was all.
Yeah. I think anytime that you can get rid of debt as a city and put that money back into usable funds so that we have it available to do what we need to do, you're gaining ground. $28,000 is not an incredible amount of money, but that's $28,000 of the taxpayers' money.
Money. The only thing I would say is, I have seen accounts in the past where they took unspent money and redirected it. So the only thing I would ask, if we're gonna do this short-term debt, is I'd like to see some kind of policy in place that transcends councils over time, that says, you know, because once you go down this path, you know, you have to kind of keep it up.
This is the new procedure.
Because if you get a bad year in there somewhere and someone decides to not do it, then that interrupts the whole process.
Yeah.
And here we go again, and then you're back into financing for 1 or 2 years while you go through that painful period. So
Yeah,
I
it's-
think we need a policy, and because, you know, we may not be here 10 years from now, maybe some other council that's dealing with this question. I think we need to have a policy on it, a budget
I think
policy.
that's
Well,
a good
yeah,
idea.
especially if we get a succession plan that policy is based off of, so that, you know, we can see how the city's gonna succeed in funding this for however, and then make a policy based on
But if
that.
you want to institutionalize it, I think you have to put some rules in place.
We'll work on it
Otherwise,
all. We'll
Yeah.
get it sent back to you.
But Ron, any future council could change the
Change
policy.
the policy.
You can always do that, but
but they may not know that there is a policy.
That could
I
be.
guess is my point.
That could be.
Or maybe they want
if
to
you've got
ignore it.
one, at least if you've got one,
You can say so.
they've got to go back and change it.
Sure, sure.
There's something there that says, we've looked at this, we've been there, this is not a good idea.
Right.
Think about it before you do it. So I'm with Ron, I think that there should be a policy. I think that would be a very positive thing.
I agree also.
Okay, Mayor, I've got a plan, if you're ready for the next one.
Sure.
We'll bring that back to you. The next item, the city council budget. As I mentioned to us at the retreat, this is something that I wanted to put out so that we know that there's a travel budget, there's a resource that council has. The only thing that I proposed was $11,500. I do believe that's significantly low, for a couple reasons. One reason is that your positions are unpaid and really unstipend. It's semi-common in some areas in Texas. It's semi-uncommon. It's 50-50 kind of split from what we looked at. But that aside, the travel portion of it, we still want to encourage council to be able to attend functions that you need to be attending. And that's where we want to make sure, some counselors have not sent in reimbursements on some travel trips. And I've had to tell you, this is one of the things that you're set aside to be able to do. One counselor submitted one and I didn't sign off on it for 2 months later. So it's still a process we need to perfect. But with this budget, it would effectively state, council has a budget for operating and we're encouraging you to do the things that the rest of our staff is doing in terms of travel and training and being present.
Mr. Josh, you started your conversation saying 11,500 is relatively low. What would the number be in your mind?
Well, there's 7 of you guys, and if we look at standard certifications, travel, and training, however active you can be is beneficial for us. So 7 people, $1,000, that's straight up just $7,000 on just travel. If you have conferences, any type of conference registration, we're handling that now through the admin budget or through the clerk or the secretary's budget. So put up another $7,000 there, you're already up to 14. 15 is a number that is a good start in my head, but that doesn't even cover, our IT would like to update the surfaces because I think one of our counselors pointed out before, our surfaces may be a little old. And so if we updated those for 7 people at $1,200 a piece, that's $8,400. So 15 turns into 23, 24. I'd say anything from 15 to 20 is a much better number. I just did the research on basic numbers and threw out the 11.5 to get council to at least consider it. I mean, it could be a bad idea, you don't like it, we just go on without it. It's something I presented before and want you to think about it.
I can help you pick out something better than a surface for the future council members. I'm just saying.
Gosh.
You
Will
are,
it
have to
have
recuse
bells?
yourself.
I don't care. I don't get paid on that. I sell servers. But what I would say is that, they're a little hard to see.
Just a little. Because your eyes
The
are back.
tiny little screen.
And so we haven't discussed this one. We didn't discuss it the last one, Mayor. I just said I'd put that together, put it out, and it was done in between workshop to now. So
And I think Arch would like to have Diet Coke on a regular basis.
You
it's
betcha.
possible. Small cans.
Small cans of airplane
I'd
cans.
appreciate Diet Coke also.
Well, I proposed this, way back when I first took office. We
Yeah.
need to have something where everybody is getting trained as best as possible. And a lot of have taken advantage to go to
TML.
Yeah,
different
the
classes
PML,
and,
yeah.
who went to the one that was split into two different sessions?
I did,
Was that you?
yeah.
So,
And, the city paid for the course. I didn't send any expense charges in for.
well, you got lucky, it was in Round Rock.
Yeah.
Had it been the
Yeah.
other one, like next year.
I went to the one in
next
San
year-
Antonio also.
I like the
For 2
idea.
days.
I like the idea of compensation because, like, right at the very beginning, when we went to San Antonio for the newly elected,
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about getting reimbursed for the
Reimbursed.
hotel bill. It was $200-something, So I think if we had compensation, I wouldn't have to worry about, having to report all that stuff. I'm giving a certain amount of money, I can spend
Make it
it
50.
wherever I want.
Well, and it sounds like we were taking the money out of other budgets anyway. All you're really doing is making it explicit that this is what it's allocated for.
It is. We would rededicate funds over. I mean, you're gonna see at the end of this year, the administration budget, which covers a plethora of items, is gonna have $140,000 still sitting there in the budget. Theoretically, we're just moving those dollars back over to where we wanna have it. And then,
Why don't you make it 20 grand and then look how it operates in the coming year, and then we can always adjust next year.
And I like the fact
I
it
like
makes
that.
it more open to the citizens.
Right.
I think we've had people put in record requests wanting to know how much a council member spent on this and whatever, and now we've
Yeah,
got
it's very clear.
now we've got a line item.
Right.
Does that
Right.
also include boards and commissions when they do something?
That's the next line.
we would, if we're gonna do this, we would need to allocate another line item for that area. So that gets right into that next one. If we're encouraging travel and training on our boards and commissions, it would go back to your policy, because those are council-appointed boards instead of staff liaison boards. You would then set that policy saying what level of training each board and commission can do, and then if there's any funds, the next line item, if there are any funds that we need to put towards a specific board, if that makes any sense. For example, the Economic Development Commission met and they said, hey, we want to make this marketing brochure. The vice chair said, how much money do we have in the budget for that? And I gave him a straight answer, very clear to me, you have $0 for that. However, in other marketing dollars, the city has funds. We would gladly use our funds for the CDC function because it's what we're doing moving forward. It's not their budget though, because they're a council liaison board and we're not dedicating anything to them. So we could, if we did it the other way, we bring it back to council, present you the item, and then you approve it or not approve it later on in the year. If we gave them a pot of money to be able to use, then they could know for the year they've got $5,000 they can make business cards out of.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of business cards. Maybe they're big.
Well, yeah, going back to E just real quickly, I would actually suggest that you look at something, building off what Councilman Sullivan said. Look at doing something like another $5,000 so you can bring in a professional facilitator post-election for the new council to talk. I mean, you never know who all's going to be on here, but it takes time to learn how to communicate with one another or that type of thing, or some sort of bringing in a professional facilitator. I have found that usually for a day charge, it's somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000. So that gives you a little bit of flexibility to do that type of work, if we have the money to do it.
But that doesn't address what Councilor Davila was saying in terms of a potential stipend. I mean, again, if we said something in the nature of there's a stipend, let's say it's $100 stipend per month, which covers your normal travel inside of the city, similar to what you do. It's not a pay, it's a stipend to cover those expenses. That would be a number that we would add to that. Again, that would be 700 times 12, so 8,000.
84.
Mm-hmm.
If we consider that, but again, that has to go back to council considering that. This is an item that's in the charter, but it says it can be changed, and it could be changed through a budget allocation or through an ordinance.
I think if you have the funds set aside already through just having a general council budget that people can submit expense reports again, I think you've got that covered.
Yeah, I think that's the easier way to do it, than me thinking on a monthly basis, I have a stipend. I'd rather know that I could go to this particular training and then I just submit you my hotel bill and you say yay or nay.
Well, the next District 10 TML is in Brenham. I mean, nobody would get a hotel, but if anybody wanted to attend, that's a little bit of a drive.
Yeah.
But I think it's clearer to the public that then they could request from STAR those exact actual expense report. And it becomes very clear and open. So
But an item that works for us in terms of presenting.
To me, it's more cumbersome to have to think about, how far did I travel when I went to here or there? If you have just a certain amount of money that's been allocated to you, then you just don't worry about it. You just spend whatever you have to get it done. I didn't make a big deal of this, but not long ago I went to the dedication of the San Gabriel campus over in Leander. I didn't charge anything for that because
I went last year.
I went
last year.
Did you?
I didn't.
But I mean,
I didn't charge anything either.
Exactly. So I didn't even think about it, but it did cost me some money to spend the day going there and gas money and stuff like that. But I wouldn't have to worry about those little incidentals. That's the way I
Question,
see it.
if we do it as a stipend, doesn't that have to be reported at the end of the year as a 1099? And we'd end up having to pay taxes on that money?
You're gonna have to report it.
Yeah.
No. Put the other way.
I'd rather just be able to turn in my expenses when I have them, be able to justify them, and just go on.
You want an expense report?
Yeah, and then that way, that's a clear record that anybody can look at. They can say, this is what he did, this is what it cost.
Well, the other would be the same thing though. If you're given $100 a month,
Yeah, but what do you do that month that you go to Fort Worth and you spend 3 days in the hotel and you have meals and travel and all
Well,
that kind
I
of thing?
think he talked about if you go over that, then you submit a report that says that you went over your $100 stipend.
I don't care to have a 1099
No,
on
I
agree.
$1,200. I mean, I worry about, what is that,
And that kind of also gets rid of the clarity that I
Yeah.
would like to see for the citizens.
Yeah.
All they know is there's $100 going to that council member, and they have no idea what that $100 is being spent on.
Again, I said the
drink a
expense
lot of beer
report
for
works best for
$100.
me. I can put my receipt on a piece of paper, send it to you, and
I also don't really want STAR to have to spend a bunch of time building 7 1099s.
right.
So what we'll do on this item here, the same thing, we've got 3 public hearings coming up, we've got plenty of discussion time set aside. If you recall, on the 13th, right now, we don't really have any other items, it's just a public hearing. So in theory, and we hang out 3 or 4 hours a day anyway, so we could hang out all night and discuss each individual item. So what I'll do, I'm gonna take these 2 items together, we're gonna finalize that budget proposal for the council budget. We're gonna add in dollars for committees. If you look at the dollars and you wanna make the change or take that out completely, we can take that out before you finalize the budget, but we're gonna take those 2, put together some numbers. We're not going to earmark for specific committees.
Right.
We'll need to do policies, as
Yeah.
Councilor Smith said before, for how they act. So we need to go back to them and say, as a committee, EDC, you've got $2,000 a year for training. So we can do that policy-wise after we sit down and set a budget, but we can't do it if we don't have a budget for it. So I'll put those 2 together and we'll submit that back out to you for September
I
6th.
think you got to at least cover the state boards, the P and Z
Yeah.
in the building and the board
Yeah.
of adjustments. I think that's a minimum.
Okay?
I agree with that.
Hmm?
I said, I agree with you.
We'll put those together for
Yeah.
you. We've got time to put that in.
Okay, great.
Next action item, you actually have the handout somewhere in front of you. This is the economic development budget. you have a handout. We did email it to you. The Economic Development Committee met a couple days ago. They were tasked with the item. Maybe stapled. It's in a stapled one.
It's the second page.
Councilor Weatherly put together for us with the staple. I forget what the
Oh,
front
there it is.
Do I have that?
The,
The marketing
yeah,
proposal.
Oh, it's on the back of the marketing proposal, okay.
So, second page, it is an EDC budget. The Economic Development Committee has turned a corner. They had their most effective meeting this week and came up with this, and I think that's a big deal in terms of what we're trying to do moving forward. So they came up with a budget of $150,000 for the year, for next year. That includes a personnel, economic development director. You can see the numbers that we put on that page include the benefits, and then working backwards from the salary and benefits, we put those numbers for marketing, fixed assets, supplies. Those are all included in there.
Is this expected to be a full-time position?
The way it's proposed, it is full-time, yes, ma'am.
This is just because I don't know. In other similar cities, is that within a range for a full-time position at that rate?
Yes, so in the state of Texas, that range, that pay would be in line with the range of $43,000 to $139,000.
That's a huge range.
It is a big range. But that's different sizes. Look at all the
Yeah.
municipalities we have here that are trying to do economic development.
Yeah,
Outside.
our size.
60 to 90.
Okay. So we might be a little on the low. I was worried it's a little on the low
It
end.
could be, but I had even proposed originally an even lower number
Mhm.
until talking to somebody that said, you're too cheap. So that's the total budget. All those numbers are flexible depending on what we do. And if you look at it, if we move forward with an economic development budget and a director, we'll go through the process, we'll develop the position requirements, and then we will see what the person is. Let's say, for example, the person comes in with these requirement or these qualifications and we want to move it, then we'd come back to council and say, hey, would you support this type of thing?
So the only thing I would say is that when we look at adding additional personnel to the city, it would be nice to make sure that the salaries support them living in the city and being able to buy a home in the city. That's just putting it out there as a comment.
If they move here, that's the only question I would say is a lot of people, depending on the age and where they're at, Chief and I had this conversation yesterday. Theoretically, let's think somewhere down the road you get a new chief. Do you want the chief to live in town, or does the best person live right outside and live in Jonestown? Maybe our preference, because we live here, is that the person would live here, but what if the greatest future chief of Lago lives in Jonestown and just has to drive over here?
Well, Jonestown, perfectly acceptable, but most people are not as crazy as I am. Somebody living in Round Rock does
I
not want to
agree.
drive out here all day.
I know what we're talking about. Just
I don't want to lose good candidates because we haven't.
But I also
We've been
think
too
if you have a
conservative.
good candidate that lives in Leander
Yeah,
or Cedar Park,
then it's no big deal.
it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Because, we would like to attract people that live in Cedar Park and Leander to come out here and work versus driving into Austin to work. So if we could find someone,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to drive to Austin.
no, So-
One more question on that is what I don't see in this budget is the cost of hiring like a Chris to help us locate that person, right? Are we going to employ those professional services because we have had such success with that before?
You have had success. To start, we would not do it that way.
Okay.
We would have those expenses internally, similar to the LinkedIn world and to our own outreach with TML.
Yeah.
We put some feelers out there already to see if there's a candidate pool, and there is.
Okay.
Very active candidate pool. There's some municipalities that regionally here that have layers in their economic development.
right.
And they've already said that there may be some people that you could cherry pick from their own. So to start, as long as we get the candidates, we wouldn't
Okay.
go with
right.
where they have.
When I went to the TML leadership training, a lot of the people that were there from other cities were economic development managers and people that worked in economic development groups of different cities.
And they wanted to
Yeah,
do
and they're
something
always
else.
looking to move on.
They're looking for the next thing.
Well, and ultimately, we only use Chris for Josh. We didn't use him for anything
Oh,
else.
Thought
We
you-
talked
I
about
thought
using
you
him for
found
the,
Eric.
No, you were
Nope.
set up to use him for Eric, and we cut him because we
Yeah.
found Eric.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I thought he had 2 wins. He only had the 1 win, that's okay.
And then get the.
And that was questionable.
They never found that guy.
Well, we went through 2 full sessions.
I know, I know.
And then it's just settled.
So,
Yeah.
the first topic, the first question here I'd like to get over to you is this something we want to move forward with? Here's
Yes.
a budget that the EDC said we'd like to present this to council as a hard number, because even without a person, this council said we need a budget for next year. And so that gets us to that point.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, we did have a very effective meeting, our last meeting at the Economic Development, but it was myself as the liaison, which I'm not supposed to be doing much communication except sitting there, and Josh, and I think there could be a person that would be more effective use of time than Josh having to be at the meeting.
Right.
Okay, and right now, Josh is gonna have to be at the meeting because someone needs to be able to speak for the city on every meeting, because all the questions are coming to Josh. So,
Even at that, I think, even if Josh still is there, because I think it's very important that the economic developer be, hit buddies with Josh, but,
oh yeah,
but somebody needs to have the time to take the actions,
right, correct,
right? That's, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's who's gonna perform the actions.
right,
We have other stuff we want Josh doing.
right, I agree.
So you're looking for expressions of support for moving
For
forward
both
with this?
things. For one, the budget for the ED, and then the second being, do we want to move forward with including in the budget for next year to have a director in that budget as well? So twofold, what do you want to see?
I vote yay.
Yes and yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Sure.
Theoretically, it doesn't matter what you 3 said. So. I know. So we'll put it in there. Just counting in order.
Looking left.
It's not a vote, so.
Right.
Yeah.
So what we'll do, I just want to make sure we put it in there, because when we get to September, we want you to have your hard numbers so that people are asking questions, and this is what we're going to post as an update online so they can see consolidated. And then back to what Councilor Smith is saying, this will be one of those items that we put on the overview sheet for this is what we're proposing to change for next year.
Right.
If it takes time to find the right person, because that's the other thing we've experienced, and we have the budget allocated, would that line, that surplus go back to general, or would we be able to keep it in economic development?
We would just make that decision through the council.
Okay.
So if you earmarked 150, let's say we don't even get out there until, what, March? March
Right.
is realistic. If you don't start it until October 1st, the process could take us to March. There's $40,000 left. Council would then decide, hey, do we want to, maybe there's something in the meantime that we could put inside for mid-year adjustment.
Right.
Or at the end of the year, we decide to allocate it there or put it back in the fund balance.
And it also may end up being a situation, in order to get the person we want,
We have
we
to
may
go up.
have to increase that salary. So if it ends up taking till March, that just gives us more flexibility in what we could offer an individual.
One would hope that a good economic development director would negotiate their salary.
I don't think so.
We're not looking for good yet. We're just looking to establish the position, and then we'll go from there.
There you go.
Keep the bar low, and then we'll move. Okay, so we'll add that in, we'll update it, we'll send it back. And again, as the mayor said, it's not a vote, but it's an option that you'll have in your numbers looking at next time. Next item, pay plan. This is something that Mayor Pro Tem pointed out last time in terms of the opportunity to, we proposed a 2.6 COLA for next year. And Mayor Pro Tem said, could we consider the 2.4 for potential merit? And that would be a 2.4% increase for excellent employees, 1.2 for good, and that would effectively have a potential for a 5% increase for excellent employees next year. Question is, originally we came out with 2.6 and 1%, which would be 1% and 0.5%. That would increase it. Total number there, $104,000. We need to know which number to finalize to put back into the budget.
I think the 2.6,
Is there numbers tied?
Yeah, where can we see
Which-
that?
for
Yeah.
the fixed increase,
Check your main book, check your budget book, and that's going to be
But that
on
hasn't
the
changed.
page.
That didn't change.
Before the consolidated statement or after?
Four,
Okay.
check page 20 in your budget book.
I'll share with you if I can find the page.
So, on page 20, it shows you what the increases equate to in each fund. And then on the far right, remember, it shows you what it is. So the proposed 2.6 COLA, it represents 113,000 for next year. The proposed 1% merit represents 43.5. If we were to do a 2.4% merit, then that's gonna represent the 104,000 additional.
Over the 43 already allocated?
Nope, not over the 43, over the 113.
So a
Okay,
total of 217.
so a difference of the 104 less 43 would be what the additional you're asking for.
61.
You're asking for.
So
My
the,
proposal was 2.6 and 1.
Oh, I see.
This is council's request.
and the merit would, so let me back up just for a second, because I like stacking merit, I really do. Would that allow for you to have 0, you've got your 2.4, 2.6, right? And then if that person's performing poorly, that's it. And then other people would stack on top of that based on whatever budget allocation you have, or?
Let me repeat it.
Yeah.
So just on the merit or talk about the COLA?
COLA's COLA, right?
COLA's done.
COLA's COLA.
So
Talking
the
about the
2.4 is
merit.
the max on the
Okay.
merit.
Okay,
So what we actually stack is, if you're average, that's 0.
okay.
That makes sense? And if you're good, it's 1.2. If you're excellent, it's 2.4.
Okay, that's just a little backwards from the way I've done it in the business world. In the business world, you just get, here's your money, and you get X percentage for each of the different buckets, right? So
Gotcha.
you set the budget, and then you worry about what percentages you can give based on the merit.
Gotcha.
But I'm comfortable either way. I just want to make sure you have the flexibility. And I assume that this would be under city manager discretion to discuss.
Yeah, all employee evaluations are verified through city manager effectively, because they're all employees of the city. But each department head would be responsible for their evaluations they are now.
Okay.
And then confirm.
Okay.
What if you're below average?
You're
Get
on
fired.
plan to lose your job.
And who would do the valuation then for, well, yourself, right? I mean,
Just you.
That'd be it.
okay.
You talking just my evaluation?
Well, I mean, is it just you that the council would then look at for budget?
That's it.
Okay.
And so again, the way my philosophy is if you look at the directors, the 3 behind me, they're gonna give their people whatever they wanna give them. And then, as I told you before, if Eric decides that all his people are excellent, just to give them 2.4, and I disagree, then Eric may be in that underperforming area. He might be looking for a job.
Maybe that new engineer.
And so flip side, if I tell you that all my people are perfect and excellent, you may look at me and say, maybe you need to find a new place because you don't know how to manage people.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of the merit system, but it does require us putting some policies in place around, like, for instance, at my company, if you just had a promotion within 90 days, you're not eligible for merit because you haven't. I mean, who knows yet, right? But it puts that in place so that people know that they don't think they're going to double and triple dip in a year.
Well, is this based on an annual?
It's annual, but if they were just hired 3 days before we said that, right? Or something along those lines, you need to have some sort of policy in place to
And
set
these are done-
expectations.
All evaluations are completed in January.
Okay,
So instead of staggered on your date of hire, which makes it a little easier, the city
Right.
has established a policy that all annual evaluations are completed in January. So then all of the merit occur in January to give them 3/4 of the year with this new number.
gotcha.
But you wouldn't want to necessarily look at a merit increase for somebody who's been there for 30
Right.
days.
And there's policies in place now that
Okay.
address some of that. just the same.
Gotcha.
But those are policies that basically you set as the city manager,
Right.
right?
We do
Those are
that.
not, those are not things that we set, because
As a
that's,
staff, we set
Right.
that to make sure that we're operating that way. And it's-
I just wanted to make sure that they
Okay.
were there.
The COLA goes October 1 in our head. So as soon as we approve the budget, we update the pay plan with the COLA. We can move that date if we wanted to and say that the COLA is effective January 1, also a policy of how we do it. But we're effectively raising the pay plan, and the people within the pay plan just happen to move, if that makes sense. That way the COLA keeps us up with where the pay plan should be, just like our utility rates would do.
What's easier for the employees? Really, I mean, when you ask that question, whatever's easiest for the employees, right?
So you really just need to, informally, the direction of, do we go with?
I like the
merit
2-4.
At 1 or 2-4?
I like
You
the
said
2-4.
2-4, if we have the money, let's do it.
2-4.
Yeah,
Okay, that's 4 and up, so we're gonna go with that.
that seems the way to go.
We won't, there's not every
You don't
year will
like
we
that?
have the money to
You
do
don't
it.
like the 2-4?
No, I like, you can give 10%, and I'm great with it. I just said my proposal was based on the fact, I believe Councilor Smith and I had this dialogue last workshop, of building the system to get it so that it's more fine-tuned before the reward is higher. But I think if you can give 5 to 8% every year, you're doing fantastic.
Yeah, if you can, if we,
That's
because
right.
there'll be years we can't,
That's
right?
Right, so
So-
we're gonna put that in there, we're gonna increase that number, you'll see that in your final. Got it, okay, great. Amendments to the draft budget, we went over those already at the very beginning when I said we hit these 5 items from the last workshop. There, I did email you one for a new position, it's also in that stapled section that you have in front of you. I think it's page 3 in the stapled section. That is for the joint utility GIS technician position. I just emailed that to you today, so you may not have seen it.
No, it's not here.
And it's not in
Did you get it?
Well, I printed it.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's not in here, but I saw it on the email.
This one?
No.
Oh, new utilities.
Here.
I've got it, utility renew position request.
Yes.
Where did you
Printed it out.
come out?
That's fine.
Because Sandra printed it for me, it was an email you guys got today, and I've been at work all day.
I've seen it, so I know
Yeah.
what it is.
So what I wanted to present to
The
you here,
utility
we haven't been
position, is that
able
what
to
he's
review
talking
that. I just want to give you a quick update. The email explains it, and there's a white paper that goes with it as well. It says that we want to add a GIS coordinated position. It's under GIS that would work between Public Works, Development Services, and IT. Effectively being a GIS person and someone that helps us as we input data into our systems. One of the things you'll see when we go into executive session tonight, as you always see, is the plethora of files that are still sitting there. That's a reduction from the past, which is fantastic, but it's not something that we're actively working on right now because we don't have that person designated to it. As well as the storage facility that has documents from well before 1984. They're still in there, which is an effective space that we could use if we were able to clean that out. As we update our data management system, we have to have people that are attributed directly to that. You'll notice that Dave nor Stan are sitting in that seat right now because they're working on other things. Because they have other work that has to be done to get us to a point. This person would allow for the input, help with the estimates for our utilities, because that's a large part of what our GIS technician does now, is estimating out for all the new development that comes in the city. And then doing any of the planning that would go on with community development and
So
Development services.
so where does the budget reside? Does it reside in development services?
that one would go with IT, and the way it is now, it would be an IT, which would come out of utility.
Yeah, okay. I understand the IT piece, I don't understand the utility piece of it, but I know it's been that way for several years.
That's where you asked, yeah, you asked now, that's where it's at. What I say theoretically is we should be splitting IT between 2 departments. We just don't split anybody really at this point, just like the manager, we don't split finance, the secretary. We earmark them, and so it balances out effectively. So all of IT goes over there, that's where this person would be. GIS is with
So it's
IT as
IT,
well.
it's IT, okay.
And that's you'll see when you look at that number, that's a lower number, but that's putting together a job description, being able to lay it out, and then the other beautiful thing about it is it gives us that, not just succession planning, but internal training process to bring someone in. Right now, we have a contract person on staff that's doing some of this work, but we've not budgeted for that contract person to move forward at all. That person would be able to apply if we did approve it, but they would just be an applicant. There's no handover here. So the request came in, wanted to present it back to council and see if you're good with us adding that for you to consider as we get to September 6th. We can leave it out, we can add it.
So you're just looking for an expression of interest?
Yes, something at
Support.
this point.
We're looking at this out of the room.
Oh,
This I can go first.
Oh, yeah, you guys go first this time.
Yeah, you go first.
No, I'm okay with y'all going first.
Go first, Ron. Come on,
If you
Ron.
want to matter, you have to speak first.
That's fine.
I would say I'm for this. It sounds like a good idea to me.
And so at that
Roll.
point, there's the two ends. We add, as we come back, it'll be an action item back on that sheet. So if we decide we need to move things out, it'll be an earmarked item that you could say, hey, the numbers don't look good on September 6th. This is $41,000 we want to move back out. So it'll be action item there.
Gotcha.
I have one other amendment so the other page you did have was an employee benefits page. That's actually in that staple thing. That would be the page 3 that I thought I was referring to before. This conversation came up, I believe it was Mayor Pro Tem asking us about our benefits. We shopped out health, vision, dental. We looked at options, we compared the potential plans, and by switching to a Blue Cross Blue Shield on health insurance, we're estimating the savings of next year of $104,000. This was sent out in an email either yesterday or today as well, so you haven't probably had real time to review that. That, as I said in the email, that's not a council decision to switch over on health insurance providers. What is a decision is, if we want to take any of those dollars that we would effectively save and give back to employees. The two options we presented, that Lisa and I presented to council, is creating a flex spending account for each employee. What we presented was $50 a month per employee. And then the other thing we proposed was increasing the family contribution from $220 to $320. There's only 6 people right now that take advantage of the family coverage. And it's because it's so flippin' expensive that only 6 people can really afford to do it. And that's one of the benefits of the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan is it goes from employee to employee spouse, employee children, and employee family. Whereas now TML only gives us employee and employee family. So you're a married couple that don't have any kids, you have to get family coverage. That would affect, the new plan would save you roughly $400 a month for your policy. Just TML just didn't have that option, so that's one of the reasons why we shopped it.
And would that cover domestic partners as well, or just spouses?
We'd make it a policy.
Okay. And do we currently have a flexible spending account available for
We do not.
employees? Really?
You have to do it yourself.
And is it spending or is it savings? This says
Yeah, that's,
savings.
is it
It's flex
HSA?
spending.
Spending.
Flex spending.
It's,
Okay.
so that's the one that rolls over every year and is
would.
pre-tax money and it's
Would-
the way to go.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
And so, to answer that question, you have that availability now, so as an individual, I can say I want to put $50 a month in, from my paycheck into that account, and then use that. This would just be an allocation from
us.
the city. So with no change, we could pocket the 104 for the year and say that's 104,000 back towards savings.
I would, honestly, if we want to retain employees over time, this is it's minimal, right, in terms of dollars, but in the competitive marketplace right now, you cannot get employees without having this type of benefit where they're doing matching or some contribution. So I would be very supportive of that. Healthcare is one of the main competitive advantages in hiring practices right now that I've found.
And the benefits, I mean, we're talking 2.6 COLA and
Yeah.
100 to 300 depending on that employee, because they may not be doing anything, so now
Right.
they take advantage of that family. That's 320 a month, and then the flex, that's 50, 370. I don't know what percentage that is of their salary, but
It's a big number.
that's a heck of a raise benefit for.
Well, and it's going to attract more candidates for these positions that we're talking about. The candidates that we want to stay here, they're going to want, it'll be another reason to stay. Or to drive all the way to Lago Vista from Cedar Park.
I'll voice interest. We'll see.
I guarantee you this is a good thing.
Yes.
It is a great
Having been on
thing.
the other end, I guarantee you this is something that really helps people.
Yes.
This makes a big difference.
It just comes down to, this is another of those numbers games, but the benefit is, it's a net sum game that we're not seeing that in the budget. So you're not having to take from one area at this point to make these savings. The second benefit is, the first question someone asks when you think about changing insurances is, well, what's gonna happen next year? Are they gonna punch us in the mouth? The beautiful thing is, we're going to Blue Cross Blue Shield, one of the largest hegemons in the world. So you know that they've got a fixed base and give you consistency in your rate structure. There's a lot of other benefits that this plan will provide us, but what we'll do, we'll add that in, split it up so you can see the two funds, and then you'll see those realized as well in there, and it'll be an action item on that sheet.
And I know it's not council decision, but just for information purposes, is this gonna lower their deductibles as well, or what are we looking at
Well,
for
the
them?
deductible stays the same, but
Okay.
the co-pays versus applied to your deductible is a better plan.
Right.
So,
And by having the flex spending account, they can use pre-tax money to meet their
and the
deductible.
insurance benefits
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
Now for any, or the prescription benefits better. For anybody that has a prescription now, you know that.
Yeah, I
with
get
our
zero.
Current plan, I've got two. One of them is $100 a month.
Ouch.
The new plan, it's $25 a month. The other one is $200 a month,
Bless
but with the new plan, it would be $0 a month. It goes from 201 to 0, and this is something I take every day for Crohn's, and that's a change. And so it was just great when Lisa come back with this report showing that, hey, Blue Cross Blue Shield's an option, and that's something we can consider.
Are you getting the same sort of feedback from the other city employees about
No,
this?
we haven't pitched this.
Oh, you haven't? Okay.
We haven't pitched it at all. When we get to staff next week, we talked about the change in plans, we talked about the expenses. If you look at it, out of 89 full-time employees right now, 83 are employee only, 6 are family. And that feedback's been, well, it's because you can't afford to add everybody based on salaries. That's where we recommended the $100 increase from the 220 to the 320. The savings on the family plan is $109. So the city would still realize $9 a month savings per family plan. The $100 would be passed on there. We'll add that, we'll make it an action item.
That's exciting. Good work.
It's 1,800.
We can completely break now for food. We can go 10 more minutes, Mayor, and then give us 20 minutes to eat, and then we can go back to, at the end of the meeting, we can go into the manager's report, talk about a couple other items. The CIP I'm good with. I really wanted to point out either the chamber discussion or the golf course discussion now, if we could do 10 more minutes.
We can't do golf
Okay.
in 10 minutes.
Yeah, just one.
Okay.
Let's hit the golf course budget. One of the big questions we've had on the golf course budget is the allocation for next year is set at a fund balance appropriation of $497,000. This year's allocation is set at $555,000.
555.
The projection by the end of the year, this year, a safe projection would say $500,000, safe. Right now, at the end of July on the financial, it shows $411,000. So that would assume that over the next 2 months, you would have $40,000, $45,000 over the next 2 months, each month of a negative expenditures over revenues. To put that, $500,000. So one of the thoughts and the questions is next year's allocation a good showing of the number of rounds that we're having now versus what we previously had? So, entire golf course budget we can talk about.
And I asked you to add this to the agenda. I think that my question is, are we being too complacent with regard to it? I think, Chris and the crew have done a wonderful job over there. And I think there's gonna be some changes next year that won't, things we did this year that won't be in next year. Perfect example is, we're not gonna renovate the clubhouse again, and so there won't be anything taken out of the operating budget for something like that. We arranged equipment last year that I don't think we're gonna have to replicate again. Our conditions continue to improve. I'm wondering, are we being complacent in what we put forward there, and can we strive for more? And I think the way I put this to you, Josh, is that, the citizens of Lago Vista very generously provided investment in the golf course during this year and in past years. And I don't think it's unrealistic that we start to expect a return on that. And can we be more aggressive and still be realistic is the question I guess I ask.
I think we can definitely be more aggressive. I just have the fear that anything done at the beginning of the year that doesn't realize to that extent may not look as good at the back end, just like now. If the 555 gave you a number to make sure you're well under, what we've talked about all year. if we come in at 500, then we know we've outperformed what our projection was. I like the outperformance at the back end instead of the underperformance at the back end. But I wholeheartedly agree with your point that we know that there's been improvements. Even the report we saw today showed that the last week was a $23,000 week. Now, a significant portion of that goes to the revenues on the whole sponsorships, but it's also 408 rounds. I mean, that's.
Well, and it's also on the whole sponsorships, we had expenses this year. Next year, we're not.
Yeah, it'll just be
It's
revenues.
pure profit next year. So, I mean, it's those differences like that make me wonder, why can't we be a little bit more aggressive? And I think the other thing is, why can't we expect more of ourselves? Because, I mean, I talked with Chris, and he emphasized that he thinks, we're good this year, but gosh, just wait till next year, because we'll have one more year of growing season. I think our conditions will continue to improve, and I think we'll be bringing even that many more, players out here. So, I just hate to be complacent and not push ourselves when I think we can do better.
And I just challenge that complacency over being conservative, or even fear is a great term that goes with conservative.
But what you're saying by setting the budget where it is now is we're not going to do any better next year than we did this year.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm actually saying is we are going to do a lot better. We just don't know if the golfers are going to respond to what we're doing. I mean, literally, I can't make you play, but I can show you that we have a great product. That's a challenge. I think as our population grows, I think there's going to be more play at the golf course. I definitely get it. I just have a fear. That's pretty much it.
And fear provides motivation.
That's right.
And
Council changes that budget allocation, we will be more motivated as much fear as you put in us.
I'm more into leaving it right where it is, because we are looking at selling Highland Lakes Golf Course. The individual buying it has expressed an interest in opening that golf course. And my concern is how much that's going to hurt our numbers once that course is open and functioning again. And I would feel much, much more comfortable with staying right where we're at, and then coming to the end of the year and telling our citizens, look at this, we're 300,000 better than what we anticipated or what we budgeted, than I would to go back and say, well, that bit into us more than we thought, and now we're over budget. So my thought would be to leave it where it's at. It's less than what it was last year. We've shown improvement. It's better. But as far as the budget is concerned, I would leave it where it's at, so that if we do get hurt with the golf course opening back up, we've still got the funds there to cover it, and we still end up in a positive situation at the end of the year.
Well, let's not pat ourselves on the back too much. It's less than last year because it's only one golf course, not two.
Right.
So I would have hoped that by, closing down one of the golf courses that was underperforming, we would have recognized a lower budget for the following year. Lower than what we have. I'm just putting it out there. So I get it. I think we need to continue to move towards getting more and more conservative. And the only thing I would say is that we do need to be cognizant that we're sending a very clear message when it's 2.5x all the other recreational activities in town. And it is. I mean, the next closest one is aviation. At 180 is the total budget. And so, what you're basically saying is golf is 2.5 more times important than every other recreational activity in this community. And so just be aware that that's the message that it sends.
Well, it's not 2.5 times, because there's income that comes back into that
She's talking
budget.
about the net.
I'm talking about the net, but, we come out, aviation supports itself. Right. And so honestly, it's quite a bit more than 2.5%. But I just want us to be aware of what we're saying to the community by this, by not putting additional pressures.
And I guess what I'd say is you leave it where it is, and there's the thought that, it's there.
We'll spend it.
We'll spend it. Versus we'll save it. And I guess I'll just reiterate, there are things that we will not have next year that we had this year. And to not take that into account and see where we can get with the budget because of that, is, to me, is short-sighted. It's saying we're not going to put any expectations on that particular budget group within the city.
Well, I think you always want to reduce the deficit that you're putting in. So if you could bring that number even further down, you know, so that we're not spending that additional dollars to support the golf course. You know, you could show a better number. You know, at the beginning of the year, the golf course was in bad shape, you know, and Chris has worked diligently him and his staff to improve the golf course, and a lot of golfers disappeared, and a lot of people from outside that used to come in disappeared, but and now it's starting to look great. Mm-hmm. So now they're coming back, but you know, I mean, you want to see improvement each year in the golf course. You know,
but what we're saying with this budget is we don't expect any improvement.
$58,000 worth.
When you consider the fact that the sign hole money is free money and no renovation of the clubhouse, we're saying we're doing exactly the same, taking those two items out. We're not going to improve at all.
That's a 10% drop.
But what I'm saying is there's things that happen this year that will not be replicated the next year, and that's effectively the 58,000. And as a result, we're not expecting any improvement next year at all. And I have a lot more confidence in Chris and his team that we're going to see improvements next year.
That's unfair. He's sitting there. So I'm supposed to say I don't have any confidence in Chris, and I'm going to leave the number here?
But ultimately, I think that's what you're saying by wanting to leave that number there, that you don't have confidence that Chris is going to perform next year.
I haven't done his eval yet, so I don't know what confidence.
So I'll put it in different terms. Well, you know, I used one that actually generates is avionics, right? Let's look at the library. The library generates no funds, right? It's all expenditures, which for the golf course is for us as well. We're basically saying to our community that the golf course is 2.5 times more important than the library. That's the message that we're sending with this budget, and that's the only thing I want us to be cognizant of.
Let's look at.
I don't think that's apples to apples, though. I don't think it costs near as much to run a library as it does to run a golf course.
We could have a bigger library. We could have more books. We could have more programs.
But here's a point that needs to be made. You're comparing the library to the golf course. The golf course brings people here. Does the library bring people here? I don't think so.
Well, but hang on a second, Arch. Yes, it does bring people here, but we basically pay them because it's a deficit account. We pay them to come here. In the case of the library, we save our taxpayers twice what the budget is for the library. So every year the library runs us about 190 something. We save our taxpayers close to 400,000 because if they would have gone and bought the items that they check out from the library, it would have cost them 400 grand.
That's not my point, though. My point is that we have an amenity that brings people here, that people move here for. That's a whole lot different than saying that somebody moves here because we have a great library.
And I don't dispute that.
That's the point that I'm trying to make.
And I think that's a valid point. But just remember, we're deficit financing every visitor because it doesn't make money. We're paying to attract those people.
I'm talking about people that move to Lago Vista because of our hill country views, our golf course views, and our lake views. They come here for those 3 views. One of them is the golf course. That's an amenity. And people should understand that an amenity is something that you have to pay for. It's not given to you. You have to pay for it in some way. And
don't pay for the lake.
Well, I'm talking about...
It's there.
I'm talking about comparing the library to the golf course.
Library's an amenity as well.
And
We're having to pay for both of them.
Right, I agree. I'm just saying, I'm just pointing out a picture of when we are talking about all of the amenities within the community, we over-index on the golf course, in my opinion. That's my opinion, and I just want to be.
The one's a revenue generator and the other one is not.
Neither is a revenue generator.
Yeah.
I mean,
but I
people
think
pay to play. They don't pay to go to the library. That's a revenue.
But okay, let's take that out of it. Are you saying that you don't believe that we should expect some kind of performance improvement for the investment that we put in?
Not saying that at all.
Okay.
I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
And so, Mayor, what I'll do on the September 6th, we'll make this item 1 instead of the back end to make sure that we look at the revenue projections, because I think that's where we're at. That's definitely where we're at in terms of what do we think we can realistically see happen next year in the revenue side? So I'm gonna take, Mayor, I know you've got an item too, and there's a couple other questions. I do wanna move these other items into the manager's discussion when we get to that today, if you're good with that, that's up to you when we get to that point tonight. But, because I do wanna have these discussions so we can finalize a draft for council come September 6th. Does that work?
Ready?
It works.
Okay.
I call the special call meeting adjourned at 6:12 PM.
So we do have in that room right behind you, there's food there.